There are things a man sees in his life that change him forever. Things that sit in his chest like stones and never dissolve, no matter how much whiskey he pours over them or how many years pass in silence. I'm 55 years old now, and I've carried one of those stones for 22 years. It's gotten heavier with time, not lighter, and tonight I'm finally going to set it down, even though I know what it'll cost me. Even though I know you'll think I'm crazy, or evil, or both. Maybe I am. But before you judge me, you need to understand how it started. Not with violence or madness, but with mercy. That's what makes it so much worse. My name is John Mercer, and in 2003, I was a forest ranger in the Superior National Forest, just south of the Canadian border in northern Minnesota. It's God's country up there, or the devil's, depending on who you ask. 3 million acres of pine and birch, lakes so clear you can see 20 feet down, and winters that'll kill you if you're not careful. I loved it. Loved the silence, loved the solitude, loved knowing that I could go 3 days without seeing another human face if I wanted to. I'd grown up in Minneapolis, suffocating on concrete and car exhaust, and when I finally escaped to the wilderness at 30, it felt like I could breathe for the first time in my life. I had a cabin on the edge of the Boundary Waters canoe area, nothing fancy. Just logs, a wood stove, and a porch where I'd sit with my coffee every morning and watch the mist rise off Lake Saginaga. My wife, Claire, had left me 2 years prior. Said she couldn't compete with the forest. Couldn't live with a man who loved silence more than conversation. She wasn't wrong. We didn't have kids, which was a blessing in disguise, I suppose. It meant I could disappear into those woods without guilt, without phone calls asking when I'd be home. I had my job, my solitude, and the kind of peace that most men only dream about. The winter of 2003 was brutal, even by our standards. Temperatures dropped to 30 below zero for weeks at a time, and the snow came down in thick, suffocating blankets that turned the forest into a white cathedral. Beautiful and deadly in equal measure. I remember January 14th like it was yesterday, the day everything changed. I was on a routine patrol, checking the backcountry campsites for any idiots who thought they could winter camp without proper gear. The sun was already setting at 4 in the afternoon, painting the snow pink and gold, and my breath came out in clouds so thick I could barely see through them. I was about 8 miles from my cabin when I noticed the tracks. At first, I thought they were from a moose. The stride was long and irregular, dragging through the deep snow. But as I followed them, crouching down to study the prints more carefully, I felt something cold crawl up my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. These weren't animal tracks. They were too narrow, too deliberate. Almost human but wrong. The toes were elongated, the heel barely touched down, and there were only 4 prints where there should have been 5. And they were going in circles, looping back on themselves like whatever made them was confused or injured or both. I followed those tracks for half an hour, my rifle slung across my back, my heart beating faster than it should have been. The forest had gone quiet. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of my boots in the snow and my own ragged breathing. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a deer carcass, something the wolves had gotten to. But as I moved closer, pushing through a stand of frozen birch trees, I realized it was moving. Shaking. And it wasn't a deer. It was curled up against the base of an enormous white pine, half buried in snow, skeletal and gray-skinned. I stopped about 20 feet away, raising my rifle on instinct, my finger hovering over the trigger. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then it lifted its head, and I saw its face. God help me, I saw its face. It looked almost human. The basic structure was there, the eyes and nose and mouth, but stretched, elongated, like someone had grabbed a person's skull and pulled it forward into something bestial. Its eyes were yellow, not the bright yellow of a wolf, but dull and milky, like old urine frozen in snow. Its mouth hung open, revealing teeth that were too long, too sharp, filed down to points. And it was starving. I could see every rib, every vertebra pressing against its gray skin like it was wearing its skeleton on the outside. It didn't attack me. That's what I remember most clearly. It just looked at me with those terrible eyes, and I saw something in them that I wasn't prepared for. Fear. It was afraid of me. This creature that should have torn me apart, this thing from nightmares and campfire stories, was dying in the snow, too weak to even stand. I lowered my rifle slowly, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. My mind was screaming at me to run, to shoot, to do anything except what I did next. But I couldn't. Because in that moment, despite everything that was wrong with it, despite the wrongness radiating from its twisted body like heat from a fire, I saw something recognizable. I saw suffering. I don't know how long I stood there, watching it breathe in shallow, rattling gasps. The sun had set completely by then, and the temperature was dropping fast. If I left it there, it would be dead by morning. Maybe that was the right thing to do, the merciful thing even. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this creature was someone, not something. That behind those yellow eyes was a person who'd been transformed into this horror, who was trapped inside a body that wasn't theirs anymore, starving and alone and waiting to die. So I made a choice. God forgive me, I made a choice. Getting the Wendigo back to my cabin was the hardest thing I'd ever done, and I've dragged injured hikers through blizzards and carried deer carcasses for miles. This was different. The creature couldn't walk. It tried once, pushing itself up on those elongated limbs, but collapsed immediately, its legs folding underneath it like broken branches. So I fashioned a travois from pine branches and rope, the same kind the Ojibwe used centuries ago, and I loaded it onto that. It didn't fight me. It just lay there, watching me with those dull yellow eyes, making a sound deep in its chest that might have been growling or might have been crying. I couldn't tell which, and that terrified me more than anything. The journey back took 3 hours. 3 hours of dragging this impossible thing through the darkness, stopping every few minutes to catch my breath and convince myself I wasn't insane. The temperature had dropped to 40 below, and my exposed skin burned with cold, but I kept going. I'd tell myself that I was doing this out of scientific curiosity, that I'd document it and turn it over to the university researchers, but that was a lie. The truth was simpler and more shameful. I couldn't let it die alone in the snow. I'd seen too much death in these woods. Hikers who froze to death 50 yards from shelter, hunters who bled out from stupid accidents, animals caught in traps. I was tired of death. Even if this thing was a monster, even if every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to leave it, I couldn't add one more corpse to the list. When I finally got it into my cabin, I dragged it close to the wood stove and piled every blanket I owned on top of it. It was so cold its skin was blue-gray, frost forming on its elongated fingers. I built up the fire until the cabin was sweltering, until sweat was pouring down my face, and slowly, so slowly, it began to thaw. I sat in my chair across the room, my rifle across my lap, watching it breathe. Its chest rose and fell in irregular rhythms, and every few minutes it would shudder violently, its whole body convulsing. I thought it was dying. Part of me hoped it was dying, because then I wouldn't have to figure out what the hell to do next. But it didn't die. As dawn light began filtering through my windows, gray and cold, it opened its eyes and looked at me. Really looked at me, not with hunger or rage, but with something like confusion. Its mouth moved and a sound came out. Not words, but a low, keening whine that made my skin crawl. I stood up slowly, keeping the rifle trained on it, and said the first thing that came to mind. "Can you understand me?" My voice sounded foreign in the silence, too loud and too human. It tilted its head, that terrible elongated head, and the whining stopped. For a long moment we stared at each other. Then, slowly, it nodded. Just once, but unmistakably a nod. My hand started shaking again, and I had to lower the rifle before I dropped it. This thing, this Wendigo, because what else could it be, understood English. Which meant it had been human once. Which meant everything I thought I knew about the world was wrong. Over the next few days I learned to live with it. I know how insane that sounds, but I didn't have a choice. I couldn't turn it over to anyone. Who would I call? The sheriff? The DNR? They'd shoot it on sight, or worse, they'd lock it up in some government facility and spend years cutting it apart to see how it worked. And I couldn't kill it myself. I'd look at it huddled by the wood stove, shaking with cold and hunger, and I'd see a person. Broken and transformed into something monstrous, yes, but still a person underneath all that horror. The hunger was the worst part. It wouldn't eat anything I gave it. Not meat, not fish, not even raw game. It would just look at the food with those yellow eyes and turn away, its whole body trembling. On the third day, it became clear what it needed, what it was starving for. I was cleaning a rabbit I'd trapped, and I cut my hand on the knife. Just a shallow cut, nothing serious, but the Wendigo's head snapped toward me so fast I heard its neck crack. Its nostrils flared, and for the first time since I'd brought it inside, I saw real awareness in its eyes. Real hunger. I wrapped my hand quickly, my heart hammering, and watched as it settled back down, but the message was clear. It wanted human flesh. It needed human flesh. And I couldn't give it that. So we existed in this horrible stalemate. I kept it warm and hidden, and it slowly starved in front of me, getting weaker every day. I'd sit up at night, listening to it breathe, wondering what I'd done and why I'd done it. Wondering if keeping it alive was an act of mercy or an act of evil. The rational part of my brain knew I should end this, should put a bullet in its skull and burn the body and never speak of it again. But I couldn't. Because every time I looked at it, I saw someone trapped inside that twisted body, someone who'd maybe been lost in these woods decades ago and transformed into this nightmare. Someone who'd spent years or maybe centuries as a monster, alone and hungry and unable to die. It was during the second week that things changed. I came back from a supply run in town, just basic groceries and diesel for the generator, and found the Wendigo sitting up. Actually sitting, its back against the wall, those long arms wrapped around its skeletal knees. It looked at me as I came through the door, and this time there was something different in its eyes. Something almost like recognition. I set the groceries down slowly, not taking my eyes off it, and that's when it spoke. Not in words I could understand, but in sounds that were almost words, broken syllables and fragments of language that might have been English or might have been something older. Ojibwe, maybe. The native tribes up here had stories about the Wendigo going back centuries. Warnings about what happened to people who resorted to cannibalism during harsh winters, who crossed that final taboo and became something other than human. I'd always thought they were just stories, campfire tales to scare children and tourists. Now I knew better. I don't understand, I said, keeping my voice calm and level, the way you'd talk to a spooked horse. The Wendigo made that keening sound again, frustrated, and pointed one elongated finger at its own chest. Then at me. Then at the door. It took me a moment to understand what it was trying to say, but when I did, my blood went cold. It was telling me to take it back. It wanted to go back to the forest. It wanted to die out there alone, rather than starve slowly in the warmth of my cabin. I should have done it. Should have loaded it back onto the travois and dragged it deep into the wilderness and left it there. Should have given it the death it was asking for. But I didn't. Because 3 days later something happened that changed everything. 3 days later, there was a knock on my cabin door, and when I opened it, there was a man standing there in the snow. Old, maybe 70, with long gray braids and a face carved from leather and time. He was Ojibwe, wearing traditional winter clothes, and when he looked past me into the cabin, past me to where the Wendigo was hidden in my back room, he didn't look surprised. He looked sad. "You found one," he said, his voice rough with age and cigarettes. "And you kept it alive. That was foolish, John Mercer. That was very foolish indeed." He knew my name. This stranger knew my name, and he knew about the creature in my cabin, and somehow that was more terrifying than anything else that had happened. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my hand moving instinctively to the knife on my belt. The old man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "My name is William Strongheart. I'm a shaman from the Red Lake Band. And I'm here because the Wendigo called me. They always do, eventually. And now you and I need to have a very long conversation about what you've done, and what happens next." William Strongheart sat at my kitchen table like he owned the place, his weathered hands wrapped around a mug of coffee I'd poured with shaking fingers. The Wendigo was in the back room. I'd moved it there when I heard the knock, some instinct for secrecy kicking in even though it was clearly too late for that. The old shaman hadn't asked to see it yet. He just sat there, studying me with eyes that were too knowing, too calm, like he'd done this 100 times before. "How did you find me?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The cabin felt smaller with him in it, the walls pressing in. Outside, the wind had picked up, howling through the pines like something alive and hungry. William took a slow sip of his coffee, considering his words. "The Wendigo sang," he said simply. "That's what we call it when they reach out. It's not a sound you hear with your ears. It's deeper than that, in your bones, in your dreams. I've been tracking this particular one for 3 weeks, ever since it woke up and started moving again. They hibernate, you know. Sometimes for years, buried in the deep snow, waiting for spring or for hunger to wake them. This one's been asleep since 1987. I was there when it was made." My hands tightened around my own mug. "Made? What do you mean, made?" The old man's face grew darker, more lined. "The Wendigo aren't born, John. They're created. Made from people who cross a line that should never be crossed, who eat human flesh out of desperation or madness or evil. The transformation isn't instant. It takes time, years sometimes, the hunger growing inside them until there's nothing left of who they were. Until they become what you have in your back room." He paused, his eyes finding mine. "The man who became that creature was named David Hutchins. He was a surveyor from Duluth who got lost during a blizzard in November of 1986. He was found 3 months later, alive 20 miles from where he'd started. But his 2 companions were never found. Not their bodies, not their gear. Nothing. I felt sick. He ate them. Yes. And for a while he seemed fine. Traumatized, guilty, but human. He even went back to his life, tried to forget what he'd done. But the hunger doesn't forget. It grows. By the summer of 1987, he couldn't be around people anymore. Couldn't trust himself. So he disappeared into the wilderness, and over the next few months he changed. Became what our ancestors warned us about for centuries. William's voice was flat, factual, but I could hear the weight beneath it. I tracked him down that fall, tried to help him, but it was too late. The transformation was complete. All I could do was make sure he stayed away from people, stayed deep in the backcountry where he couldn't hurt anyone. I thought he'd died years ago. Most of them do eventually. The hunger kills them, or the cold, or simple despair. But this one survived. For 16 years, I said, the number landing heavy between us. He's been out there for 16 years, starving. Yes. And you've made it worse by keeping him alive. William's voice hardened. I know what you're thinking. That you saved him, that you showed mercy. But the Wendigo don't want mercy, John. They want release. Death is the only kindness left for them. He's still human, I said, but the word sounded weak even to me. Part of him is still human. I can see it. The part that's human is the part that's suffering most. William set his mug down with a sharp click. That's what you don't understand. The human consciousness doesn't disappear when the transformation happens. It gets trapped inside the monster, watching itself do terrible things, unable to stop. David Hutchins is still in there, screaming, begging for it to end. And you've kept him locked in that prison for 2 more weeks. I wanted to argue to defend what I'd done, but I couldn't. Because he was right. I'd seen that suffering in the Wendigo's eyes, that desperate awareness. I'd just been too afraid or too stubborn or too lonely to acknowledge what it meant. What happens now? I asked. William stood up, his joints cracking. Now we perform the interrogation. It's what my people have done for generations when we find one of these creatures. We ask them to remember who they were, to speak their truth one final time before we release them. It's the only ritual we have that shows them respect, that acknowledges they were human once. He looked toward the back room. And then we give them what they've been begging for. We end it. The interrogation took place an hour later, after William had prepared. He'd brought sage and tobacco, a ceremonial pipe, items I recognized from the few powwows I'd attended over the years. We moved the Wendigo into the main room, and it came willingly, dragging itself across the floor with those 2 long arms. William sat cross-legged in front of it, and I stayed back near the door, my rifle in my hands even though I knew I wouldn't use it. William began to speak in Ojibwe, his voice low and rhythmic, and then he switched to English. David Hutchins. That was your name. Do you remember? The Wendigo's head lifted slowly. Its yellow eyes fixed on William, and for a long moment nothing happened. Then it spoke. Not the broken sounds it had made before, but actual words, rough and distorted but unmistakable. I remember. My breath caught. William continued, his voice steady. Tell me what you remember. Tell me who you were. I was a surveyor. I had a wife, Sarah, a daughter, Emily. She was 7. The words came slowly, painfully, like the creature was dragging them up from some deep well inside itself. I loved them. I wanted to go home. What happened in the woods, David? The Wendigo made that keening sound again, anguish radiating from every line of its skeletal body. We were lost. So cold. Tom died first. Then Marcus. I was alone. So hungry. I didn't want to. But I did. I ate them. I ate my friends. The last words came out as a wail, inhuman and devastating. And then you changed, William said gently. Yes. Slowly. I tried. I tried to stop it. Tried to die. But the hunger, it won't let me die. It keeps me alive. Keeps me searching. Keeps me. The creature's voice broke. I've been in hell for 16 years. Watching myself. Unable to stop. Unable to end it. I was crying. I didn't realize it until I tasted salt on my lips, but tears were streaming down my face. This thing, this monster, had been a man with a family. Had made one terrible choice in an impossible situation and paid for it with decades of conscious torment. William reached out and placed his hand on the Wendigo's skeletal head, and the creature didn't flinch. Your suffering ends tonight, David. You'll be released. Your family will never know what you became, but I'll make sure they know you're at peace now. Can you accept that? The Wendigo, David, nodded. Please, it whispered. Please. What happened next, I won't describe in detail. William used methods his people have kept secret for generations, rituals designed to kill a Wendigo without violence, to release the human trapped inside. I held the creature while William worked, felt its body relax for the first time since I'd found it, felt the tension drain away like water. In its final moments, the yellow faded from its eyes, replaced by something clearer, more human. It looked at me, and I swear it smiled. Then it was gone. We burned the body that night, out in the forest, the flames reaching up toward the stars. William sang in Ojibwe while I stood silent, watching the smoke rise. When it was done, he turned to me. You can never speak of this, he said. To anyone. Ever. I know. Do you? Because what you did, keeping it alive, trying to save it, could have gone wrong in 100 ways. If it had escaped, if it had found someone else, if the hunger had won. He shook his head. You got lucky, John. Don't mistake luck for virtue. He left before dawn, disappearing into the forest like he'd never been there. I went back to my cabin, cleaned up the evidence, and tried to return to normal life. But normal was gone. I couldn't look at the forest the same way anymore, couldn't enjoy the solitude without wondering what else was out there, starving and suffering and unable to die. It's been 22 years now. I'm 55, retired from the Forest Service, living in a small house in town where I can see my neighbors and hear traffic. I left the wilderness behind, but the memory came with me. Every winter, when the snow gets deep and the temperature drops, I think about David Hutchins, about the choice he made and the choice I made and whether either of us did the right thing. I don't have answers. I just have this story, this confession I'm finally telling because the weight of it is too much to carry alone anymore. If you take nothing else from this, understand this. Mercy isn't always kind. Sometimes the greatest compassion we can offer is to let go, to grant release rather than prolong suffering. I learned that too late, but maybe you won't. Maybe you'll remember if you're ever faced with something impossible, something that asks you to choose between your heart and your head. Maybe you'll make the better choice. I hope you do. Because I'll be carrying mine until the day I die.